You're listening to The Stall and Stable Show, ideas for happy horsekeeping.
The road we travel to success with horses is sometimes a long and arduous one. And when we turn a corner, it feels like we're actually getting closer to success. This is part 2 of Turning the Corner with Tick, a success story that follows my journey with Susie. From struggling as a DIY horse trainer to finding confidence as both a leader and a friend to my horse, when you surround yourself with people who share your values as a horseman and a human, magical things happen. So listen in. This is episode 120 of the Stall and Stable Show, part 2 of 2. This episode is brought to you by American Stalls. American Stalls provides farm owners with hundreds of choices of premium quality stall components and accessories. From European stall fronts to paddock gates and custom doors and windows, everything they make is of the highest quality. In a world full of unpredictability, having a home for your horses that is predictably safe and comfortable means having a home outfitted by American Stalls. To learn more, visit them online at americanstalls.com. Hey listeners, thanks for checking in for part 2 of this special episode hosted by horse husband extraordinaire Buck Harris. Where we left off in part 1 was how I got connected with Tick Maynard and subsequently the clinic this past weekend that changed everything. Before I went off on a tangent in part 1 of this episode, I mentioned Horse and Rider Books. Horse and Rider Books is how I met Tick Maynard. They sent me his first book, In the Middle Are the Horsemen, to read and review on my show. That is how I was introduced to Tick, because his book was one of the first books that they sent me to read, and I loved it. And I felt it was like someone wrote a book about horses in the language that I was speaking. I could feel intuitively that this was a person who understood the balance of what we used to know, what we don't know yet, and what we can do today. His phrase, in the middle, struck me so directly.
Tick is a lifelong learner, and I think that's the difference between people who box up what they know and then apply a one-size-fits-all approach to horsemanship, and someone who is humble enough to constantly say, well, I'm going to throw away this little piece and add this new piece. And then I'm going to throw away this other little piece and add this new piece. And then you end up with, Tick Maynard. Somebody who can actually speak the horse's language, not only to the horse, but to the people around him. And it's such a powerful experience when you see it. So your first experience with Tick was up in Maine?
I did the podcast with him, and that was great fun. Well, it was really interesting because when I first called him to say, would you like to do the podcast? He was like, have you read any books by other trainers, and who have you read? I was like, well, Buck Brannaman, Mark Rashid, Monty Roberts, John Lyons. And so he was like, okay, I'll be on your show. So, of course, we did that first podcast, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that. So then he said to me, I'm going to be up in Maine doing a clinic. Why don't you come? And so I went there and I dragged you along, and I got to see him work in person. And it was everything instinctually that I knew my horse needed, that all horses needed. And there it was right in front of me happening. And it was effective and it was kind. Again, it was effective and it was kind. And there was no projecting of ego onto the horse. There was no frustration. And yet there was this person who was saying to us, I understand how frustrating this can be. I can understand how emotional you get when you're working with this kind of challenge. I felt seen, I felt heard, and I also felt like here's a person who can give me the tools to go back home and make some progress with my horse in a way that she needs.
So you incorporate some of what Tick is bringing to you, but you brought some other training techniques to your to your turning point as well.
Yeah, so like Tick, I don't think it's one way or the highway, which, there are a lot of professional horsemen and women out there who will say, buy my DVD, buy my book. This is my way. This is the only way. I don't subscribe to that at all. So I would pick and choose what I felt comfortable with from the trainers of note, that I have been exposed to over the last 30 years. And I felt very strongly about using positive reinforcement and clicker training.
Why?
Because of the science behind it. Because it treats animals like animals, not as motorcycles, not as machines, not as extensions of the human psyche. It's shaping animal behavior.
And they love it.
But oh my God, they love it.
They love it. Susie, when you get the clicker and the bucket out, she's like, what are we doing? Bring it. Let's play. It's not work to her. And there's an old saying, when you love your job, it's not work, right? That is what clicker training does for, I don't know if it does it for all horses, but they respond in a really positive way.
So the interesting thing about the trainers who had referred to Susie as having a bad attitude or poor work ethic, when we would do clicker training on the ground, she loves puzzles. So I could put ground poles in different kinds of configurations. I can ask her to do some really complicated footwork in hand, and she never minds that. And even when she's frustrated or confused, she tries. She does not give me any trouble. The only time she ever gave me trouble was under saddle, which made me think this horse is uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable. Whether it's something that she's got going on or me as the rider. I didn't have so much ego that I never looked at myself as the problem. And in fact, I swung too far in the wrong direction. Like, oh my gosh, it's always me. So Susie, yes, she likes clicker training because she likes problem solving. She's a puzzle solver. So I would try these different training hats on. Some of them were great and others were like, oh my God, I never need to do that again.
Well, we went out to California last summer to Monty Roberts' farm. There were some really important takeaways there.
Yeah. So Monty's methods, I think there is a place for them. I felt and still feel uncomfortable with a certain aspect of them. But I also recognized that it's effective in shifting the mindset of a very specific target market of horse trainers who previously used painful, harsh, scary techniques. It actually gets the horse to exactly the place that you want it to be. It is not completely unkind. Is it stressful? Yes. Everything we do with horses in a human environment is stressful.
And you've got a modified version of it now, I think, that this seems to be working. And so the idea of join up is important in horsemanship.
And join up, some people call it connection. Monty calls it join up. And I think that is a very valid milestone that all horse owners and handlers want to reach.
To me, join up is like an emotional experience. Every time I see it, I get emotional. I've never really experienced it because I've never really, I don't get out there and do it. But when I see it happen, when your horse starts to lick and chew and then look at you and you wait and then the horse approaches you and then follows you around and says, okay, you are my leader. I trust you. There's something to me that is otherworldly in that, where you've tapped into the soul of a herd. I mean, I could be a little off base there, but I think that having that creates something that is a base for you to work from. Am I off base? Am I out of line there?
It's a base. It's not the middle, which is where I want to be.
Okay. I love that.
So natural horsemanship the goal of natural horsemanship is connecting with your horse. And a lot of natural horsemanship trainers use body language and pressure and release, both physical pressure and energy pressure, to achieve dominance. And I think that there is a difference between dominance and leadership.
Does leadership imply more partnership?
Leadership to me implies trust. Dominance implies control and compliance. I wasn't quite sure about the differences between those two things until this past weekend.
Mm-hmm. And so take us there.
So I'm looking at all these different trainers and taking the pieces of what they're doing and incorporating them into how I'm working with all three of my horses, Susie, Clarabelle, and Brody. When it comes to animals and understanding them, I am not timid. I have been an animal person since the day I hit the ground coming out of my mother's womb. I have worked with dogs. I have worked with cats. I studied wildlife management in college.
You were a vet tech.
I was a vet tech as well. So understanding mammalian behavior was not foreign to me. As I'm looking at these different trainers, I'm not going, oh, this feels good. I want to pamper or baby my horse. No, I went into this with very realistic expectations of what it means to interact with a human and an animal, with a human and a horse. So I'm looking at all these trainers and I'm cherry picking what I think is both effective and comfortable. I'm looking for the balance, the middle. And again, this is why Tick's approach and his philosophy resonated with me. And even though I'm looking out at all these other trainers, I keep coming back to what he's teaching me. And I've been riding Susie. She's healthy, she's fit. Now I'm going from what I would say, and I love Stacy Westfall, and Stacy uses the metaphor of kids in school, like horses as elementary school students, and then middle school students, and then high school students, and then PhD candidates. So I went from kindergarten teacher, how to teach my horse life skills and how to eat good snacks, to, well, now I'm kind of moving up into 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. How do I teach my horse to walk, trot, and canter? I'm now moving into their athletic coach. And I have no experience doing this. I can barely ride. I can stay on hunting, but I'm not a good technical rider. So this is my next leap. This is my next DIY challenge. And I thought I found a good instructor to come to my farm to help me with that. I remained open, even though her methods seemed to be contradictory to everything that I had learned and everything that I feel comfortable with. I don't feel that I can form an opinion about somebody until I actually experience what they have to teach me.
And you were getting some results, which made it a little more confusing.
Yeah, I was getting results because she was pushing me past the point of, she was making me do stuff. She was getting me unstuck.
She also treated you like a better rider than you thought you were. And so I think that really helped. So again, from a higher level takeaway here, incorporating bits and pieces of all these different things. So even though that didn't turn out to be a long-term relationship, you were able to borrow enough from it to leverage some of what you're experiencing now, for sure.
And I also found my voice. I was desperate to have I needed a coach. I'm tired of working by myself. My horses deserve for me to work with a professional. Okay. I've met all of their horse care obligations, my horse care obligations. And I knew the whole time when I got these thoroughbreds, I knew that I was going to need to work with a professional. We all do. We all need a coach. So when it came time for us to part ways, when I felt that instinctive part of me saying, this is wrong, Susie is not comfortable with this trainer, I had to say, this is not working. And that was really hard because I was desperate to work with a professional.
You know, one of the things that happens when you're on a path like the one you're on, when you are a lifelong learner, but you also have goals that are really important. You're not just learning and spinning around in circles. You've got goals. You pick up things along the way that are really important that stick with you. And there are important people that say things here and there that you'll always remember for the rest of your life. You may have had 100 conversations with that person, 1,000, but there's one thing that they said that you're always going to remember. And when we were in California, you had an experience with someone who said to a trainer, the trainer was working with her horse, and she said, no. You will not use a whip anywhere near around. He wasn't whipping the horse, but as soon as the whip came out and he started to even touch the horse with that whip, it was no, you do not go there with my horse. And this is a powerful moment because you've got a woman, you've got I'll say it, a man, right? And it's a man's world out there in a lot of ways. And this is a cowboy kind of man who's not taking any shit from anybody. And she said, no. That imprinted on me, and I know that imprinted on you.
It was Nellie Kennedy. Thank you, Nellie.
Thank you, Nellie. So along the way, right, we get these, when you're a lifelong learner, the universe is going to bring you these moments of learning, these moments of real clarity. You used the word courage earlier. Do you have the courage to put to work what you know, or are you going to cower in that moment and say, I know better, but I'm too afraid to step up? And I don't mean cowering in the face of a horse that's out of control. I mean cowering in the face of the people that want to push you into their box and keep you there. And if there's one thing that Helena always says is, I don't like being trapped. So if you're ever going to fall into a trap with somebody, get in it with Helena, because she'll find a way out and you can just follow her, and that's me. I have followed you out of a few traps here, and that's another episode too. But so the idea of being able to say to someone, this isn't working for me. I know you're my trainer, but you've got to meet me halfway in certain places or this isn't happening. And then it didn't happen.
And now I'm at this place where the two types of training are coming together, the mental training of the horse and the physical training of the horse. And having been a high-performing athlete, I understand the mindset of how do I get my body to do what it needs to do to be successful, to be competent in this sport. And I know what kinds of coaches were able to get that out of me. And there are times where I need the compassion, I need the pat on the back and say, woohoo, you're great. And there are times where I needed to be like, get your ass in the pool right now and go. I try to use that mindset and apply it to my horses. Am I meeting their mental, social, physical needs? And now how can I meet their needs as a coach? And this is where the clinic really brought it all together with me. I've got all of these trainers, all of those little moments that you said, these things that you remember. And I'm trying to make a little library in my mind where I can access these snippets when I need them. And it takes a lot of inner work is to find the valuable snippets and separate them from the clutter and everything else that people want to say. You're not a good enough rider. You're too timid. You should be doing this. You should be using more rope. You should be using a lunge whip. You should be using spurs. You should not be using spurs. You should not be using bits. How do you eliminate all of the clutter in your mind? Focus just on those snippets that are really valuable, that fit deeply in your soul with what you're trying to do. I have not taken Susie off property in 2 years, and I haven't taken her to a big clinic like this. This is when both Tick and Sinead were there. It was at a big farm. It was an hour and a half away. So I had to start putting everything that I have learned as a DIY backyard trainer into practice just to get her off the property and to this farm so that she could be in a place where she could learn.
But I want to say one thing about this too. You've ridden with Tick 5 times. You have been able to extract the essence of what he's bringing to the table because the means is more important than the end. So your trainer, it's all about the blue ribbon. You're going to get a blue ribbon. We got to get this horse where you're going to get a blue ribbon. You're going to make this horse do this. You're going to make this horse do that. You're going to do this. You're going to get in shape. But that's all BS to you. What you want is the connection with your horse every step of the way. And when you see Tick speak the horse's language and get the result through the connection, that didn't require hundreds of lessons. That required, it's like a small miracle where you see the essence of what that person is bringing, and then you can actually tap into that essence.
Oh, I'm also like Hermione. My hand goes up. And I'm actually annoying. So Tick, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry for being annoying, but I need to squeeze out of you everything I can in the short time that I have your attention. And so, yes, you have to, again, have the courage. Sometimes you have to be inappropriate. You have to ask that question so that I can then take that nugget of information home with me and do something good with it.
So how do you wrap up all of this whole conversation into what you experienced in 2 days, an hour each day with Tick Maynard and in the environment that you were in? How do you wrap that up?
I have 4 words: trust, confidence, leadership, and friendship.
Wow.
And I'll see if I can fill in the blanks for each of those quickly. Trust. I trust Tick. He is a very secure, self-assured individual. He is kind, but he's the kind of coach who will push you. He just assumes you're going to do it because he thinks you can. He creates a very trustworthy environment so that I'm not afraid to make mistakes when I'm riding with him. I don't feel like he's going to judge me. I don't feel like he is going to make me feel less than. He's not going to humiliate me. He's going to encourage me. He's going to tell me where I've gone wrong and what I need to do to go right. When you're in a trustworthy environment like that, you then find your inner confidence. And when you've got that confidence, that is the first step toward leadership.
And your horse certainly feels that.
So what is the difference between friendship and leadership? And this was where I was getting confused. And I think this is where a lot of women in particular, as horse handlers, where we get confused. I was going from the friendship that I had created with Susie, which is a strong friendship. She trusted me. She will follow me anywhere. But Susie didn't have the self-confidence that leadership can instill in a horse. And so Tick clarified for me which training techniques, both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, pressure and release, how to use those techniques interchangeably when it was time to be my horse's friend and when it was time to be her leader. So I then created a trustworthy environment for her that created confidence in her to try things that maybe made her anxious before. Working in the round pen where you do use energy pressure and release, similar to the way Monty uses it for join up, there is a place for that. It is, it's a type of social skill that's different than what you develop with clicker training, with positive reinforcement. There is a social dynamic between the human and the horse that needs to happen, and moving their feet. A lot of natural horsemanship trainers, a lot of trainers, period, will tell you this. When you move a horse's feet, you establish authority, you establish leadership, but it allows the horse to relax through your authority, through your leadership. You do not have to hurt the horse. You do not have to flood the horse. You don't have to create so much stress and cortisol in their system where they become exhausted. You simply need to use an element of energy, pressure, and release to establish yourself as the creature who will move their feet. They then feel comfortable that there's somebody in control. I can go more into clinic takeaways, but clarity in doing that is important for establishing leadership, but it is that balance between, again, that middle point between friendship and leadership that got me to a place that turned the corner.
That's beautiful. And I want to add, you learned a lot from Brody because Brody understands how to be a leader and a friend to the 2 mares that he lives with. He is their leader, and he does not apply more pressure than he needs to, but he certainly makes clear where his boundaries are and where their boundaries are and the way they're all going to work together out there. He's trained, especially Clarabelle, how to respect where he's coming from. And she does. And when she approaches him to share hay now, she goes with timidity and humility. And so that's a language that horses naturally understand. So you can't just throw that out the window. To speak the language as clearly and consistently as Brody does is a goal. That's because then you're really getting yourself and your own emotions out of the way.
Exactly. Up to a certain point, I think all natural horsemanship trainers have something valuable to offer horses. When they push a horse so far past their threshold, you'll know it, and you'll want to step back from that. But the body language of horses, which Monty calls equus, that's in everything he does. It is so in his DNA, in the fabric of who he is as a human being. He is so capable of bringing a horse to that place, of becoming a horse's leader. So I respect that. And he's very conscious of how far he pushes a horse over that threshold. There are some trainers, natural horsemanship and otherwise, who push a horse over that threshold so far, and you can feel that it is dominance.
So the horse will do what they want, but...
So they're taking a good thing. They're taking the body language of horses, pressure and release, and it goes over and above. You'll feel it in your gut when you see that happen. And on the other hand, there are positive reinforcement trainers, again, my favorite, Shauna Karish, who really incorporate the friendship part. Like Tig says, 90% of the time they need you to be their friend, 10% of the time they need you to be their leader. So Shauna's got the friendship part down.
That's why we love her.
And that's 90% of the training. Then you have, you've got, old school you've got Buck Brannaman, you've got Mark Rashid, John Lyons, who isn't really active anymore, but the Colton Woods, new people who are coming up, Mary Kitzmiller, Stacy Westfall. These are trainers who incorporate a little bit of everything, but are very conscious to honor the horse's threshold. And they do their training without ego, without the need to dominate, without arrogance, but also without saying, like there are some clicker trainers, R+ people who are like, it has to be 100% R+ all the time. When you find yourself with someone who says it's all or nothing, look for someone else. I will tell you that a year from now, it's possible that everything we talked about in this podcast today could be different. Because we don't know what we don't know.
I hope so. But you don't leave the past completely behind. So I would wrap it up by saying, be a lifelong learner. Borrow from everything you experience. There's no wasted information if there's something you can learn from it, whether it's something you decide you don't want to do or something that you're going to incorporate. They're both important for your lifelong learning, and your horse will appreciate it. And when you really tap into speaking the language of the horse, that's what happened with Helena in my eyes this weekend. Was she found her horse voice. And as a person who's been striving to find that probably her whole life, to see that actually happen was an emotional experience for me. So congratulations on finding that voice. And I really look forward to years of watching you use that voice and fine-tune it and work with horses and continue to help so many animals and so many people connect.
Well, thank you. I give a lot of credit to all these trainers and to Tick, but I couldn't have made it this far without you.
Beautiful. I think that's a wrap for this week's show.
That is a wrap for this week's show. Thank you, listeners, for following along, for your support, for your emails, for your kind words. If you liked this episode, I hope that you will share it far and wide. It's an important conversation, I think, because I think there are a lot of people out there just like me who struggle. If you are struggling, I'm here for you. You can go up to stallandstable.com and find all the resources that I have available for folks just like you. And many thanks to our wonderful sponsor, American Stalls. You can find them at americanstalls.com. And that is a wrap for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it.